Welcome. Today, we are undertaking our most ambitious journey yet, a full 24-minute deep dive into the psychological phenomenon of false forgiveness. This isn't just about a marriage ending, it's about the silent, invisible ways we betray ourselves for the sake of an image. We often view forgiveness as a heroic act of closure. But what if it's actually a form of avoidance? In my 8 years as a family therapist, I've seen that forgiving too quickly is often a way to sidestep the messy, painful work of real transformation. Today, we follow Michael and Emily's complete 24-minute arc. They were a couple who had it all until the foundation was shattered by an affair. They chose the noble path, staying together for the children and offering immediate forgiveness. But over the next 24 minutes, we will see how that choice created a museum of a marriage, a place where everything looks perfect, but nothing is alive. We'll examine the physical, emotional, and even generational toll of this choice. Is it possible to forgive too soon? And what happens when a home is built on a lie that everyone is too afraid to call out? Let's step into the first act of this long-form study. Act 1. The performance of normalcy. Every marriage is, in some way, a performance. But for Michael and Emily, the performance was all that was left. Let's begin the analysis. Michael and Emily were the couple everyone envied. 3 kids, a beautiful home, and a decade of shared history. They were the anchor couple in their community, but behind the closed doors of their impeccable kitchen, the air was becoming thin. Emily had been the one to step outside the marriage, a brief, desperate affair born of loneliness. When the truth came out, the world stopped. But then, Michael did something unexpected. Within 48 hours, he sat Emily down and told her he forgave her. He said he wanted to move forward, to keep the family together, for the children. They decided right then and there to never speak of it again. They would be the strong couple who survived. But forgiveness, true forgiveness, isn't a switch you can just flip. It's a slow, agonizing process of reconstruction. By choosing to bypass the pain, they weren't building a bridge. They were building a wall made of everything they refused to say. They were now living in a performance of normalcy, a high-stakes play where the audience was their 3 children. Every shared meal, every "I love you" whispered before sleep felt like a line of dialogue they hadn't written. The performance was perfect, but the actors were starting to break under the pressure of maintaining the illusion of a happy home. They were living in a suburban landscape that looked like a dream but felt like a desert. They were protecting the idea of a family at the expense of the actual people who made it up. And in Act 1, we see just how exhausting that performance can be. As we move into Act 2, we see the true nature of their arrangement. Michael's forgiveness had come with a price, a silent, unspoken ledger of Emily's debt. He was the saint, she was the sinner, and while he never brought up the affair, he never truly looked at her either. His eyes would skip over her, focusing on the kids or the television. The steel-blue atmosphere of their home was growing colder. Emily, desperate to earn her way back into his grace, became the perfect wife. She anticipated his every need, took on more of the household burden, and silenced her own needs for connection. She felt she didn't have the right to ask for anything anymore. But Michael's saintliness was a shell. Inside, a dark charcoal resentment was beginning to form. He wasn't moving past the pain, he was storing it. Every time she laughed, every time she tried to be intimate, he was reminded of what she had done. He felt morally superior, and that superiority became his only comfort. They were caught in a cycle of false normalcy and hidden distance. The kids, Sophie, Max, and little Leo, were growing up in a house where the temperature was always just a few degrees too low. They didn't see fighting, but they didn't see warmth either. They were learning that love is a quiet, careful thing, something you have to protect by not being too loud or too real. The cracks were there, but Michael and Emily were too busy pretending they didn't exist to see that the whole structure was leaning. They were living as roommates in a museum of their former love, and the silence was becoming deafening. Resentment is a slow-growing cancer, and in this act, we see how it began to consume the very heart of their home. It was 3 years later when they finally walked into my office. They didn't come because of a crisis. They came because they were tired of the weight of the silence. Michael sat where he always did, far to the left, leaning away from Emily. Emily sat on the edge of her seat, her eyes constantly searching his face for a sign of life. They told me about the affair, about the forgiveness, and about the 3 years of peace that followed. But the peace was a lie. It was Act 3, the mask cracks. I asked Michael a simple question. How do you feel when you look at Emily today? There was a long silence, a silence that felt like it lasted forever. And then, the charcoal mask finally cracked. Michael didn't look at her. He looked at the floor and said, "I realize I don't love her anymore. In fact, I think I hate her. Not for the affair itself, but for the person I've had to become to stay with her." The room went cold. Emily's face turned to silver, the color of shock and sudden brutal clarity. The heartbeat in the background of their marriage had finally stopped. This was the moment of absolute reveal. The staying for the kids had cost Michael his capacity to love, and it had cost Emily her sense of being a person worthy of love. They were both prisoners of a decision they thought was noble. Michael's hatred wasn't a choice. It was the natural consequence of a forgiveness that was forced, not felt. It was the bill finally coming due for 3 years of emotional evasion. They were finally telling the truth, and the truth was devastating. The house of cards had finally collapsed. In this act, we witnessed the death of the suburban illusion and the birth of a painful, raw reality. In our private sessions, Michael's raw pain became the focus of Act 4. He spoke about the 3 years of silence as a slow-motion car crash. He had convinced himself that by staying, he was being a hero. He thought he was protecting his children from the trauma of divorce. But as he spoke, he realized he was actually teaching them something much more insidious. He was teaching them that resentment is the price of commitment. He described the empty bed, the way he would lie on the very edge, terrified that his skin might touch hers. To him, her touch was a reminder of betrayal, and his own body had begun to reject her. This is the physical toll of false forgiveness. It manifests as tension, as headaches, as a literal inability to be close to the person you claim to have forgiven. Michael was dying inside, and he felt he had no right to complain because he was the one who chose to stay. He was trapped in his own nobility. We analyzed his cognitive dissonance, the gap between his actions, staying, and his feelings, hatred. To bridge that gap, he had to shut down his heart entirely. He wasn't just not in love with Emily, he was not in love with his lie. He felt like a ghost haunting his own home. And the children? They were starting to notice. Sophie, the eldest, had started asking why Dad was always so tired, why Mum was always so careful. The kids were breathing in the charcoal smoke of their parents' resentment, even if they couldn't name it. Michael's heroism was starting to look a lot like a slow-motion tragedy. In this act, we challenged the assumption that staying is always the more moral choice. Sometimes leaving is the only way to save the people you love from the version of yourself you've become. Michael's interior hell was the price he paid for a peace that was never real, strategic silence. Now we turn to Act 5, Emily's perspective. While Michael was the saint in his prison, Emily was the sinner in hers. For 3 years, she had lived under a microscope of her own making. She felt she had to be perfect to justify her existence in the family. She lost her voice, her spark, her very identity. She was so grateful for Michael's forgiveness that she didn't realize it was actually a life sentence of emotional subservience. She described her life as walking on eggshells made of glass. Every word she spoke was filtered through the fear of upsetting the delicate balance Michael had set. She felt her love dying too, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion. You cannot love someone you are constantly afraid of disappointing. The cold silver aesthetic of her life was one of isolation. She had no one to talk to about the affair. After all, it was supposed to be over. She was alone in a house full of people. This is the other side of the stay for the kids argument. We often focus on the person who was betrayed, but the person who committed the betrayal is also a human who needs a path to actual redemption, not just a perpetual state of probation. Emily realized that by staying, she was teaching her children that love is about penance, not partnership. She saw Sophie watching her, mirroring her careful movements, and it broke her. The heart monitor of their marriage wasn't just flatlining, it was already cold. Emily's realization in this act is the turning point. She saw that her forgiveness wasn't a second chance. It was a slow-motion execution of the woman she used to be. The prison wasn't built by Michael alone. It was a co-constructed reality based on the fear of what divorce would mean. But they were already divorced in every way that mattered. In Act 5, we see the absolute exhaustion of a life lived in service of a lie. Truth was the only way out, but the way out was a mountain of pain. In Act 6, we step back to look at the broader psychological landscape. What is true forgiveness? It is not the absence of anger, it is not forgetting, and it is certainly not a decision to stay together for the sake of an image. True forgiveness is a deep, painful process of acknowledging the wound, feeling the full weight of the loss, and then, only then, deciding if a new relationship can be built on the ruins of the old one. Michael and Emily skipped the feeling part and went straight to the staying part. This is why it failed. They were practicing performative forgiveness. In my 8 years as a family psychologist, I've seen this pattern over and over. Couples prioritize the structure of the family over the substance of the relationship. They think the kids need the house, the shared holidays, the two parents under one roof. And while stability is important, children also need to see what a healthy, honest, and loving connection looks like. They need to see that conflict can be resolved, or that endings can be handled with integrity. When we stay in a toxic, resentful environment, we aren't protecting our children. We are conditioning them for a future of similar suffering. We are teaching them that love is about endurance, not enjoyment. This act explores cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. Michael believed he was a good father because he stayed, but he felt like a hateful husband. The only way to resolve that tension was to numb himself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to provide them with two happy, separate homes rather than one miserable, united one. We examined the 68% of couples statistic, those who choose the performance. Are they truly helping their children or just avoiding their own fear? True forgiveness requires a death of the old self. In Act 6, we dismantle the myth of the perfect stay and explore the necessity of emotional integrity. As we broaden our lens in Act 7, we look at the intergenerational shadow. We often say we stay for the kids, but what are we actually handing down to them? Children are emotional sponges. They don't just hear our words, they feel the vibration of our homes. Sophie, Max, and Leo weren't seeing a happy marriage. They were seeing a blueprint for a life of quiet desperation. They were learning that love is about silence, about careful movements, about not asking too much. This pressure creates a sacred cow, the idea that a two-parent household is always superior. But at what cost? We're seeing a pattern in society where forgiveness has become a tool for social compliance rather than emotional healing. We look at the 3 years of silence again, not just for Michael and Emily, but as a metaphor for the years of emotional hibernation so many couples endure. They are the quietly desperate. This act explores the concept of emotional infidelity to oneself, the betrayal of your own soul for the sake of a social structure. We see the sunset through the window, the end of a certain era of marriage. The children, unaware in their play, are the often cited reason for this endurance. But we must ask, what are we actually giving them? A stable home, or a blueprint for a life of quiet desperation? When we validate complex, contradictory feelings, we find that there is no villain here. Michael isn't a bad person for feeling resentment, and Emily isn't a bad person for wanting to be truly forgiven. They are both victims of a cultural script. This act honors the difficulty of both choices, staying and leaving. Both require immense courage. Both come with a price, but only one allows for the possibility of a future built on truth. Are the silences in your life peaceful or just quiet? Give your children the gift of an honest life, even if the honesty is painful. And so, we reach Act 8, the challenge. I want to look you directly in the eye and ask the impossible questions. Is staying for the kids always right? Or is it sometimes the most selfish thing a parent can do, avoiding the pain of divorce at the expense of their children's emotional education? If you were Sophie, Michael, and Emily's daughter, what would you want for your parents? Would you want them to stay in a house of charcoal silence, or would you want to see them find a way to breathe again, even if it meant living apart? Should Michael have left 3 years ago, or should Emily have realized that a forgiveness without feeling is just a stay of execution? These are the real questions. There is no happy ending here because life doesn't always provide one. Sometimes the only resolution is the acceptance of reality. Michael and Emily eventually decided to part ways. It was the hardest thing they ever did. But as Michael said in our final session, I can finally look at her without feeling like I'm looking at my own failure. And Emily found that she could finally begin to forgive herself, now that she wasn't being forgiven by someone who didn't love her. This deep dive wasn't meant to give you a map, but a mirror. What do you see when you look in it? Is your forgiveness a bridge or a wall? As we conclude, I want you to sit with these questions. 5-second pause. Is it better to be alone or to be lonely in a room full of people? What would you do? Comment below. Share your story. Subscribe for part 2, where we look at the aftermath and how they finally spoke to their children. This is Maria, and this is the silent death of a marriage. Thank you for staying for this 24-minute journey. I'll be reading every one of your stories. Good luck. In Act 9, we explore relational integrity. Integrity isn't about perfection, it's about the alignment of our inner truth with our outer actions. Michael and Emily's marriage was a house built on the shifting sands of an inner lie. To find true healing, we must be willing to let the old structures fall. This can feel like a death, and in many ways it is. It is the death of the life you thought you would have, but it is also the birth of the life you are actually living. Whether you choose to stay or choose to leave, ensure that your choice is rooted in honesty, not fear. Your children are watching, yes, but more importantly, they are feeling. They are absorbing the vibrational frequency of your home. Give them a frequency of truth. This act challenges the sacred cow one more time. Is a united household built on a lie better than a divided one built on the truth? We look at the statistics of adult children of divorce versus adult children of high conflict stayed for kids' marriages. The results might surprise you. Resentment is a poison that doesn't stay contained in the parents' bedroom. It leaks into the hallways, the kitchen table, and the children's future relationships. Relational integrity is the only antidote. It requires the courage to be seen in your mess, your pain, and your truth. For Michael and Emily, integrity meant letting go. What does it mean for you? As we move toward the final minutes of this study, we must ask, is actual forgiveness possible after resentment has taken hold? The answer is yes, but it doesn't look like staying. For Michael and Emily, actual forgiveness began only after they separated. Once the pressure to perform was gone, they could finally see each other as human beings again. Michael could see Emily's genuine remorse without the lens of his own trapped obligation. Emily could see Michael's pain without the lens of her own guilt-driven subservience. They are now co-parenting with a level of honesty they never achieved during their marriage. This is the paradox of Act 10. Sometimes you have to leave to truly forgive. We examine the steps to this real healing, the radical acceptance of the past, the release of the moral high ground, and the commitment to a life of truth moving forward. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to the other person, it is a freedom you give to yourself. And sometimes, the most generous thing you can do for your children is to show them that a mistake doesn't have to be a life sentence. In these final acts, we honor the complexity of the human heart. There are no villains here, only people trying to find their way home. For some, home is a new place. For others, it's a new way of being in the old one. Where is your home? The story of Michael and Emily doesn't end here. It continues in every home where a secret is kept or a truth is avoided. Your perspective matters. This channel is a space for these difficult, morally ambiguous conversations. If this resonated with you, if you've lived this or seen it, please share your thoughts in the comments. We are building a community of people who are willing to look at the hard truths of love and family. Your save, your share, and your follow help us keep these deep dives going. I'm Maria, and I'll see you in the next session. Remember, love is not just a decision, it's a practice of truth. It is the hardest practice there is, but it is the only one that can truly set you free. Thank you for staying for this full 24-minute journey. Your time is a gift. May you find the courage to live your truth, whatever that may be. Goodbye for now. Piano fades to silence. Final heavy cello note.